adopted the statement as her own. She can and should be held liable and responsible for that statement. Ms. Heard tries to make something out of the fact that Mr. Waldman reported her to law enforcement in Los Angeles for perjury after her allegations of abuse were made against Mr. Depp. But I'll submit to you that all this proves is that Mr. Waldman believes Ms. Heard has committed perjury. Mr. Ronborn argued that the lack of supporting evidence for Ms. Heard's allegations of horrendous, constant abuse is somehow not something to be considered. That it is shameful for you to consider the fact that she didn't document all the terrible injuries that she claims to have suffered. That is a twisted argument. First, you know, because you have seen and listened to Ms. Heard in action, that Ms. Heard is a woman who's documenting things throughout their relationship. And it is instructive that the things she chose to document had nothing to do with violence. She documented Mr. Depp sleeping. She documented lines of cocaine, featuring prominently Mr. Depp's loan-out company or production company, Infinitum. Stage photographs, that's what she documented. Mr. Rottenborn's entire argument assumes that Mr. Depp, a man, should be disbelieved because despite the fact that Ms. Heard can't support her accusations with actual evidence. What we have put to you, the jury, is not that because Ms. Heard didn't take enough pictures or tell people about abuse that it didn't happen. What we have put to you is that given how brutal and constant the abuse Ms. Heard claims, she would have had serious injuries. That's a fact. She would have had serious injuries that would have been observable in the pictures we looked at and by the witnesses we heard from, and would have required medical attention. That's it. Ms. Heard testifies to injuries that multiple people didn't see. What you have in the end is Ms. Heard's word. Do you trust it? We are not here because Ms. Heard told the world Mr. Depp was verbally abusive. This is not about the words used by Mr. Depp. We are here because Ms. Heard told the world that Mr. Depp was physically and sexually abusive. That's what Ms. Heard was saying in the op-ed. On May 27th, exactly 6 years ago today, 2016, Ms. Heard walked into court with a mark on her face to tell the world that her husband was abusive. She renewed that falsehood in her op-ed, describing herself as a public figure representing domestic abuse. And she published the op-ed, including the title, claiming that she spoke up against sexual violence. Everyone knew who she was talking about when she used those words. She was alleging physical and sexual abuse. She was not alleging emotional or psychological abuse. She was alleging physical and sexual abuse. Ms. Heard cannot run away from her own allegations now. You have all heard the evidence of what she alleged against Mr. Depp in 2016, and you have all heard her incredibly dramatic, over-the-top story of physical and sexual abuse. That story was a defamatory lie. Ms. Heard tried to argue that you only need to find that Mr. Depp might have touched Ms. Heard once in order to find in her favor, because that makes her a victim of abuse. But common sense should tell you that you can't pick and choose Ms. Heard's allegations. You saw her on the stand. We all did. She gave the performance of her life, telling you story after story of abuse. And not just any abuse, but extravagant, over-the-top allegations of abuse that would be truly brutal, horrific, if true. You either believe all of it, or you believe none of it. Either she's telling the truth, including in her most extreme allegations, or she's lying. Either she was raped by a bottle, or she's the sort of person who would get on the stand in this courtroom and lie to you and the world about being raped. And if she would lie about that, what wouldn't she lie about? You can't find that Mr. Depp hit her once. Either he hit her countless times, or you can't believe a single word that comes out of her mouth. And what is the actual meaning of Ms. Heard's op-ed? That's an important question. It's not that Mr. Depp said a nasty word to her once. It's not that Mr. Depp might have hit her once. It's that she is a representative of domestic abuse. And by extension, Mr. Depp is a representative of abuse perpetrators. Words matter. Ms. Heard has shown you a lot of text messages from Mr. Depp with some very vivid language. As I told you at the start of this trial, Mr. Depp has a unique style of writing. He uses words I don't use. And you probably don't use either. But as you also heard during this trial, Mr. Depp writes in that way, in part because he modeled his writings on literary giants like Hunter S. Thompson. And he's got a dark sense of humor. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's who he is. And Mr. Depp owns text messages. He acknowledges that he said those things, and he said things that he shouldn't have. But using bad language and colorful humor does not mean that you are a violent abuser. And ironically, as much as Ms. Heard is trying to use Mr. Depp's words against him, it is Ms. Heard who repeatedly admitted to violence. In her own words. You've heard the tapes. You've heard her admit to violence. Ms. Heard can try to distract you with text messages showing that Mr. Depp uses bad language and has a dark sense of humor. But none of that, I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, none of that is evidence of abuse. Hitting your husband is evidence of abuse. Mr. Ronborn talked about the burden of proof. Let's talk about that for a minute. Mr. Depp only has to show that it is more likely than not, that the statements in the op-ed are false, that it is more likely than not that they have a defamatory implication, that it is more likely than not that Ms. Heard designed and intended the statements to refer to Mr. Depp. And the evidence on these points is clear. Ms. Heard made these allegations 6 years ago today, May 27th, 2016. She went out of her way to make them public, tipping off TMZ. When she published the op-ed, she was reminding everyone in Hollywood and the world of her abuse claims. And those claims are a lie. Consider what the true purpose of the article. Mr. Ronborn said it was to promote legislative reforms. But what was it actually? The evidence shows it was to promote Ms. Heard. It was timed to be released at the same time as Aquaman on December 21st, 2018. And it was timed to coincide with her announcement of her ambassadorship at the ACLU for women's rights. That's not a coincidence. It was designed that way. That was not a statement about legislative reforms. This was about burnishing Ms. Heard's reputation at the expense of Mr. Depp's. It was about Ms. Heard continuing to portray herself as a heroic survivor of abuse. And on the question of actual malice, that just means whether or not Ms. Heard knew the allegations were false. Ms. Heard knows perfectly well that she wasn't abused. She has direct knowledge of that. She was in that relationship. So actual malice is easily established. You may have noticed that no one showed up for Ms. Heard in this courtroom other than her sister. Every other witness who traveled to Virginia for her was a paid expert. This is a woman who burns bridges. Her close friends don't show up for her. Mr. Rottenborn tried to discredit Mr. Depp's witnesses by suggesting they're all on Mr. Depp's payroll. So he doubled down on the hoax theory, that everyone's just lying. First of all, it's not even true Keenan Wyatt is on his payroll. Ben King isn't on his payroll. Officer Melissa Sines isn't on his payroll. Morgan Tremaine isn't on his payroll. Officer Tyler Haddon, he's not on his payroll. Beverly Leonard, Alejandro Romero, Brandon Patterson, Morgan Knight, none of those people are on his payroll. And Kate Moss. Kate Moss is most definitely not on Mr. Depp's payroll. Ms. Heard wants you to believe that all these people are lying. Let's talk about the Boston plane. Ms. Heard wants you to believe that the recording you heard is from the Boston plane flight. But that's quite telling. What did Ms. Heard capture of this supposed rampage? Mr. Depp moaning in distress? That's what she chose to record. What sort of person records something like that? What sort of person takes pictures of their husband or boyfriend or fiance who's struggling with sobriety, nodding off with ice cream dripping down his leg, his hand in his pocket, or asleep on the ground? What sort of person does that? Definitely not someone that's afraid of him. And Ms. Heard's attorney told a story of May 21 that was completely, utterly inconsistent with the testimonies of Officers Sines and Haddon, who testified clearly that they saw no signs of injury, no sign of property damage. And she told a story about how Officer Sadanaga's testimony was also wrong. She testified that the report was only required in case of a crime. Ms. Heard's attorneys tried to tell you that Mr. Depp apologized on May 22nd because he had hit Ms. Heard. Mr. Depp didn't apologize to Ms. Heard on May 22nd for hitting her. He apologized because he was leaving Ms. Heard. And this was a woman that, in spite of all her violence and all her rage, Mr. Depp, he loved her. He had been with her for years. Of course he apologized when he finally broke it off. Ms. Bredehoff also tried to tell you that Ms. Heard did everything in her power to keep the authorities away and to not get Mr. Depp in trouble on May 21st, 2016. Take a minute and think back to what Ms. Heard did 6 days later, 6 years ago today. She walked into court with a visible mark on her face, not wearing makeup that day. She tipped off TMZ, she made it public, and she showed up on the cover of People magazine with a mark on her face. Was that protecting Mr. Depp? Or was she trying to destroy him? Mr. Rottenborn asked you to consider why you're here. So why are you here? You're here because of a lie. And that was a lie that Ms. Heard repeated in the op-ed. At the start of this trial, we told you that this trial is about the evidence. The evidence overwhelmingly shows that Ms. Heard is an abuser and that she is a liar. She lied about Mr. Depp and took on the role of a lifetime as a public figure representing domestic abuse. What is her best evidence of that abuse? A video of Mr. Depp banging cabinets around, and text messages of Mr. Depp using bad words and dark, ugly humor, but never once admitting to abuse. Pictures of Mr. Depp sleeping. That's her best evidence. Ms. Heard held herself out to the world as a representative of abuse survivors everywhere, the face of the Me Too movement. This is not a Me Too situation. There are no Me Toos, just not me's. Ms. Heard does not deserve to be known as a representative of survivors of abuse, and Mr. Depp does not deserve to be known as a representative of perpetrators of abuse. That is what this case is about. It's not about money. It's about giving Mr. Depp his life back 6 years ago when she took it away. While you deliberate, ask yourselves why Mr. Depp would put himself through this. Expose every embarrassing detail of his life on national television. If he was guilty of anything that Ms. Heard accuses him of. We ask you, we implore you, to render a verdict for Mr. Depp. We ask you to set the record straight, that he is not the abuser she described, and that she is not the heroic survivor she portrayed. And we ask you to tell Ms. Heard that what she did was wrong. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Right, thank you, ma'am. Rebuttal closing?
How about that?
Yes.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's interesting that in both their opening and their rebuttal closing, that you heard Mr. Depp's attorneys address none of Ms. Heard's witnesses. None of Ms. Heard's witnesses. They listed their own, who didn't see, who were on his payroll, weren't there behind closed doors with him, but they didn't address any of the witnesses. For example, Josh Drew, Rocky Pennington, Liz Mars, who were all there on May 21st, Melanie Iglesias, who covered Ms. Heard's bruises. They say that no one showed up for her. No one showed up for her, but then they say that these people aren't friends anymore. If they're not friends anymore, then why would they be doing what they would suggest are lying for her? Why would they be corroborating everything that she says? It's this simple. If you believe that Depp was abusive to Amber one time ever, in any of the various forms of abuse, not only physical, verbal, emotional, psychological, sexual, any of the ways of abuse, then your job is very easy. And you can not only deny Mr. Depp's claim, but you can fine for Amber on her counterclaim. And it's interesting that Ms. Vasquez just changed their theory after 6 weeks. She said, oh, well, domestic abuse just means physical abuse. It's not what Mr. Depp said. It's not what Dr. Curry said. It's not what Dr. Hughes said. It's not what you know to be true. You know that the evidence that you've seen constitutes all sorts of abuse. And there's a reason that they're running as fast as they can from those sorts of abuse, because they know that he did it. Now, the suggestion that Amber's abuse allegations are a hoax is vicious and vile. Mr. Depp can say whatever he wants now, but he can't change the evidence that you've seen at the trial. The evidence shows that Ms. Heard did not commit abuse hoaxes. Not about sexual violence, not about May 21st, 2016, and certainly not about Mr. Depp and Mr. Waldman's catch-all, all-purpose statement that Ms. Heard's abuse hoax, which suggests that every one of her allegations are false, that that's coming to an end. The evidence shows she did not commit any of those hoaxes. The evidence shows that she was abused exactly how not only she, but her witnesses supporting her claims say that she was. And their witnesses, even, who claim that Mr. Depp abused her. Ms. Vasquez talked about actual malice. She says because Mr. Waldman was acting as Mr. Depp's agent, you have to look at Mr. Waldman. They're standing in the shoes of one another. And as Mr. Depp's agent, Mr. Depp's malice is Mr. Waldman's malice. Mr. Depp's malice is Mr. Waldman's malice. He acted with actual malice when he made these statements. Now, after years and years of Mr. Depp controlling the roles that Ms. Heard took, Ms. Heard had the biggest hit of her career 3 months before she was sued. She had withstood Mr. Depp's attempt to have her fired from Aquaman and his own jealousy as his career went down the drain before her op-ed for reasons having nothing to do with Ms. Heard. But once the lawsuit against Ms. Heard was filed, his campaign that he promised to destroy her entered a new phase. And then it reached a crescendo when Mr. Depp and Mr. Waldman decided to meet with the Daily Mail together and decide to plant statements that were defamatory of Ms. Heard in the spring of 2020, leading up to the UK trial. You've heard Amber and her agent, Jessica Kovacevic, talk about the impact to Amber's career. She can't get hired because of the negative treatment she gets. Studios like her, co-stars like her, she tests well, but she can't get opportunities because of the negativity associated with Mr. Depp and Mr. Waldman. You heard Amber Heard on the stand yesterday telling you exactly what she has experienced as a result of Mr. Depp's promise to bring her global humiliation. That promise To paraphrase Catherine Arnold, Ms. Heard's damages expert, that promise was a spark. And that promise he kept because he had told her again and again, the only way out of this is death. And when she chose a different path out of it, he decided to make that promise. He decided to throw that spark. And when Mr. Waldman became involved, that spark became a forest fire. That forest fire has continued to this day. We ask, ladies and gentlemen, that you hold Mr. Depp accountable for his actions. Stand up for victims of domestic abuse everywhere who suffer in silence. Stand up for the freedom of speech, the freedom to speak about your life that the First Amendment protects. Give Amber Heard her voice back. Give Amber Heard her life back. Thank you so much for your service on this jury.
Thank you, Mr. Rottenborn. Members of the jury, this is an important case to both the plaintiff and the defendant. In order to reach a verdict, each of you must agree on that verdict. In other words, your verdict must be unanimous. The first thing you should do when you go back to the jury room is to select a presiding juror. The role of the presiding juror is to see to it that the deliberations are conducted in an orderly and businesslike manner, that they are conducted only in the jury room when all the members of the jury are present, and that each juror has the opportunity to fully and fairly express his or her views. It is rarely helpful for jurors upon first entering the jury room to take a straw vote, or for any juror to make an emphatic expression of his or her opinion in the case, or to announce a determination to stand for a certain verdict. To do so before all jurors have had an opportunity to consult with one another and exchange views and opinions might allow your sense of pride to prevent you from retreating from an announced position, even when shown that such position is unsound. You have a duty to consult with one another and to deliberate with the objective of reaching an agreement, if it can be done without offending your individual judgment. Each of you must decide this case for yourself, but only after an impartial consideration of the evidence with your fellow jurors. In the course of deliberation, a juror should not hesitate to re-examine his or her views and change his or her opinion if convinced it is an error. However, none of you should surrender your honest conviction as to the weight or effect of the evidence solely because of the opinion of your fellow jurors or for the mere purpose of returning a verdict. In the jury room, you will have the exhibits that were entered into evidence. You will also have the instructions of law that I just read to you, and you will have the verdict forms. You'll also have a laptop, and that laptop will have just 2 files on it, and Deputy Lusa will set it up for you in the jury room. One is the plaintiff's files for audio and video files, and one's the defendant's files for audio and video files, and you'll be able to hear and watch those as well, the ones that were submitted into evidence. During your deliberations until you are discharged from jury service, you must not communicate with or provide any information to anyone who is not a member of this jury by any means about this case. You may not use any electronic device or media to conduct any independent research about this case, the legal or factual issues in the case, and the individuals or attorneys involved in the case. You are not permitted to consult dictionaries or reference materials, search the internet, visit websites or blogs, or use any other tools to obtain information about this case or to help you decide the case. Do not try to find out information from any source outside of the testimony and the exhibits received as evidence during the trial. You will also have, I know the attorneys discussed briefly about the verdict forms. You'll have 2 sets of verdict forms, one for Mr. Depp's case and one for Ms. Heard's case, okay? Now, when you have these verdict forms, the first 3 pages of both verdict forms have each of the statements separately. Okay, so when you're going through it, you're going to look at each statement separately and answer the questions that are on the page, okay? Now, if you decide yes for every question for a statement, then that's when you go to the last page of the verdict form, which is for damages. So, for example, if you find yes for all of statement 1, then you could go to 4 and 5 for damages. If you find yes for all of statement 1 and statement 2, you still go to 4 and 5 for damages. If you say yes for statement 1, statement 2, and statement 3, you obviously go to 4 and 5 for damages. If you answer no on any of the pages for any of the statements, you don't go to 4 and 5, okay? So that will be for all of them. And then when you do come to a verdict, make sure the foreperson signs it and dates it, and then just let the deputy know about that, okay? All right, now, for the tough part, you may remember at the beginning of this case, I told you we would randomly select 4 people to be the alternates, okay? We still have 2 alternates left, and the numbers were placed in the envelope from the very beginning of the case. So let me just say before I release the alternates that I know that this trial has been a huge sacrifice for all of you, and I have taken, and you've taken away from your life for weeks on end here. And I know I speak for all of us associated with the case, and I want to thank you for your service in this matter. I know how hard it is to come this far and then not get a chance to deliberate, but that does not lessen the respect and admiration that we have for you. As an alternate, you will not deliberate, but you are still under order of this court not to do any outside research in this case or to talk to anyone about this case at this time, and you're still under your oath as a juror. That is because if something happens to a juror during deliberations, I will call you back for service, and you will join the deliberations, and they'll start again, and you'll be part of the jury. So you are under these restrictions and your oath until a verdict is reached. We will contact you once this has occurred, and then you'll be free from your obligations, okay? But again, thank you for your service, all right? So in this matter, the alternate jurors are juror number 3 and 14, all right? At this time, those jurors are excused, and also the remaining jurors can retire now to the jury room to begin their deliberations, okay? So thank you all, okay? So it'll always be at the top of the hour. So for example, if I get the verdict at 10:20 in the morning, it wouldn't be read until noon. So it's always going to be at the top of the hour, at least 60 minutes later, if that makes sense. That gives you time. I would ask that at least one attorney is close enough within a 10-minute range for any questions. I'd appreciate that. Okay. And I know some of the attorneys are going to be leaving, so I just wanted to thank all of you for your professionalism and your hard work during this case. It's much easier being a judge when you have excellent trial attorneys in front of you. It does make it easier. And I also want to thank the attorneys and litigants for the kindness and the great demeanor you've shown to my staff and to the courthouse staff and to the deputies in the sheriff's department. I really appreciate it. It means a great deal to me, okay? And I also appreciate Judy because she's a rock star, okay? So, yes, thank you. Oh. Well, that's a first, okay.
Your staff and the deputies have been absolutely phenomenal, all of it through just outstanding. Did everything, we really appreciate that, and appreciate it.
All right. All right.
That is one thing on which Ms. Preda-Hofton, we respectfully agree. Completely agree. Completely agree.
Well, good. I'm glad on the last day we finally have an agreement.
Thank you, Your Honor. We're very grateful. Thank you.
You want to approach? Sure.